again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Slowly, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. And this week, well, they say all good things must come to an end. This week we finish out the Tennessee Split, the project of 1977, going back in time. And in order to finish up this lovely project, we're going to bring back on the man himself, the man who put this all together. Welcome back, Mr. Steve Crawford.
Hey, it's good to be back. Just got back off the, I was on assignment, you know, in
Mr. Assignment, yeah.
Iceland and Norway and the UK. So it's good to be back in the great United States of America and talking about professional wrestling. So that's a good deal. Well,
it's good to have you back on the podcast. I'm sure, you know, it's nice to be home after all of that traveling you've done, Mr. On Assignment. But at the same time, I'm sure you have some stories to tell, some sights you saw, and you posted a lot of pictures on social media. It looks like you had a great time, man.
One of the best vacations I've ever had. Just, those are gorgeous countries. If anybody ever has a chance to get over there and see those places, they should definitely do it.
Awesome.
But anyway, today we'll talk a little more Tennessee Rasslin today. How's that?
Yeah, you sent me this file to look over before we do the show today, and you titled it, "And Now the End is Near." And so I kind of we faced the final curtain, I suppose, as we finish this.
Yeah,
we technically finished it last time. Now we're going to kind of do an overview of sorts.
Well, yeah, it's maybe more of a postscript than an overview.
True.
What I really wanted to kind of look at, we looked at, okay, what happened in Nashville business in 1977 after the split, what happened in Memphis in 1977 after the split. And as we left it, the Gulas side of the house was doing horrible business at the end of 1977. And you had, Joey and Lynn Rossi in main events against the Poffos and things like that, kind of hot-shotting all summer with the Sheik and Abdullah the Butcher and Andre the Giant coming on quite a bit and Fargo still being around. And then I just kind of wanted to kind of look at, okay, what happened over the next few years on the Nashville side to kind of cause it to go out of business. And that's kind of what we'll be talking about as we go through today.
Go out of business? I thought you were going to tell me they were going to be back they're going to be ascending back to the top. They've had some time.
We'll talk about these huge houses according to Dutch Mantel. We'll take that with a little grain of salt when I get into some information from one of Dutch's book about that time frame. But one of my friends asked me, like, why did Memphis do so well versus the Nashville side of the house? And really, and I told him, like, how many Jerry Lawlers are there in the world, right?
Sure.
Because Lawler was so good as a heel and so good as a baby face. He could be in either position and, he could be arrogant. He could show disgust. He could be smug. He could get vulnerability. He could be funny. He just was so good at projecting emotions. And I think it's hard for people to understand, like, how over this guy was in Memphis during this time frame. This is a time frame where you've got basically, 3 to 5 television stations in your area. You've got a show that when it's on, like 70% of the TVs in the city of Memphis are watching the wrestling show. And you have no major sports team in the area. This is the guy. This is the biggest, one of the biggest celebrities in the area.
Right.
And it would be comparable to what Steve Austin and The Rock, during the Hot Attitude era, but more in a localized way. And Nashville didn't have anybody, with that sort of talent and charisma that could just kind of carry the territory. So that was one of the issues. I'm going to look at 1978 a little bit on the Nashville side of the house. I do have one show where the attendance was 4,000 people, where they brought Fargo back in He was teaming with Bob Eaton and George Gulas against Tojo. Yeah, the Jet Set had been in place against Tojo, Gypsy Joe, and the Mexican Angel. So, I mean, a huge house, 4,000 for that show. And then there's 13 other shows with an average attendance of 930.
Wow.
So, you're basically looking at 1,000 people a week, most weeks from what we can tell.
Yeah.
And the big feud early in 1970 on the Nashville side was Dutch Mantel and Randy Savage. And Dutch wrote in his book, The World According to Dutch, about how he was just, he came into the territory's flat dead. He starts watching Savage, and he said this Savage was just selling out the dressing room every night. All the wrestlers would come out and watch all of Savage's matches. And Dutch said, Dutch and Randy went to the booker and said, hey, we need to work a program. They turned Mantel babyface. And, I'm sure they had a pretty good program. Those guys were, Dutch is one of those guys, I think he peaked in the ring before the national expansion era.
Right.
I think his best years were probably late 70s, early 80s. And by the time you get to the mid 80s, I think he slowed down a little bit. But I'm going to read a little bit from Savage's book. When I first got to the territory, the attendance was downright abysmal. Savage and I took that bad attendance and turned it into almost sellout business within 5 weeks. Our shows always started as advertised at 8 p.m., but Nashville started selling out at 7:30 p.m. and the building was packed by 8. By this time, it was summer, so you can imagine how hot those buildings were and how rabid fans were to see the Dutch Savage match, that they could understand hours of withering heat just to get to it. Now I'm going to make an editorial comment here.
Okay.
Because Savage was not in the territory in the summer of 1978. so when Dutch is talking about, they're selling all these buildings out in the summer of 78 with Randy Savage. Randy Savage was in the Maritimes by the summer. But
Right.
they did feud kind of like February, March, April time frame. Anyway, Dutch goes on to say Chattanooga and Birmingham both had buildings that seated 5,000 people. We never did sell out, but we got those cities doing close to 3,000 paid customers during that time. Picking up a town from 500 people to around 3,000 is a major accomplishment. When Savage and I would go to the ring for a match, you could literally sense the crowd pulse change, and it would hit me like a brick. It's an addictive feeling, almost like getting pumped with adrenaline. I thought at one time that if medical science could market and merchandise that feeling, it would be the best-selling drug of all time. One thing you had to have when you wrestled Savage was aggression. If you left aggression in the dressing room, Randy would just literally beat the living crap out of you. So I stocked up on aggression when I wrestled Savage. I've gone 45 minutes with Savage, and I've done the same with Ric Flair. Give me Flair. It was so much easier with Flair because at least with Flair, at some point he would slow down, especially when he had the figure 4 on you. Savage had no speedometer. He was wide open all the time.
It's the cocaine, brother.
It's the cocaine. Yeah. And there's another, he's talking about the interviews, and it sounded like Savage was already kind of developed persona here. Randy's interviews were incredible. He would ramble on and wave his arms around and touch his sunglasses and say, "Oh yeah," and "Can you dig it?" with a gravelly voice. Savage looked and talked every bit like a crackhead years before meth was even invented. When you saw Savage do an interview, you thought one of two things: drugged to the hilt or completely insane. And perhaps a combination of those two things.
I would think so during that era. Sure, I would go along with that.
Yeah. I'd love to have legitimate attendance figures on that time frame. Right. We don't really have. I don't really could not find any attendance figures for the matches when they were headlining. I'm sure it popped the territory. It certainly didn't do sellout business during the summer when Savage wasn't there. But hey, this is Dutch telling his story.
It's his story. He can tell it any way he wants, right?
That's right. Some of the people that were in the Nashville side in early 78, you got Ox Baker in there. I saw him, he had a match with Lou Thez. I would pay good money today to see a Lou Thez Ox Baker match from 1978. That would have to be hysterical. JYD was still there as Leroy Rochester for a while. The summer, Bobby Eaton becomes George Gulas's teammate as the Jet Set, as you mentioned.
Poor Bobby.
And yeah, poor Bobby. And of course, it's a, of course you're going to get the big push and you're going to be on the top because you're with the promoter's son. And the bad part is the promoter's son's George Gulas.
There you go.
So, you got to take the good with the bad. Mantel feuded with Francisco Flores during the summer. You can tell Tom Ernesto was booking during this time because he would bring the Mexican Angel back to Memphis in 1985.
Yeah, we just got there on the other project in '85. Yeah, Mexican Angel. More things changed than more they stay the same, it would appear.
It was interesting to me. They brought in Andre the Giant and the Sheik in October of that year, and it only drew 1,600 people.
Wow! So
you can tell the interest was just not there. Savage did come back at the end of the year, and they did the feud again with Mantel for a little bit at the end of the year, but he'd leave in early 1979.
Well, if Sheik and Andre aren't drawn more than 1,600, you have to imagine those 3,000 fan crowds that Dutch is talking about probably never happened. If Sheik and Andre are only pulling in 1,600, it's kind of hard to think what they were doing business-wise, how they were able to stay in business like they were with what they were drawing.
Yeah, well, and there's a long, like a 3-hour interview online with Eric Embry that Steve Carino conducted years and years ago. Mm-hmm. And Eric worked for Nick Gulas in 1978. And his comments were, Nick's territory was no comparison to Jarrett's territory. Business-wise, it was nowhere close. Nick knew he was going out of business. He knew it wasn't going to last forever. Mm. So he said that Nick was really afraid that Jarrett would just come in and take over his cities because he knew he didn't have the star power to compete with Jarrett at that time. So here were the guys that were on top for most of 1978 for Gulas. Mantel had like 29 main events, so he's the lead babyface, and he's kind of carrying the territory that year. Savage had 19. You've got Gypsy Joe in 13 main events, the Mexican Angel in 10, Tojo in 8, Bobby Eaton in 7, Ken Lucas in 7, and then it goes down from there. But that gives you, and I think part of the big problem, I think, was just after the split, he just relied so much on the same guys. I think just the talent getting stale was a huge part of the issue.
I think some of the issue, just on what I saw, Steve, too, when I was doing this, is it's the guys that agree to come in or will work for whatever they're getting paid here, or the guys doing the one-shots like a Haystacks Calhoun or the Sheik or something like that, because, Bobby Eaton, he's still green to the business, so it's fun to see that Bobby, just a year in, starting off with Arvel Hutto, and now Bobby's got a couple main events under his belt, so that's pretty cool. And of course, Randy Savage looks like when he's in town, he's getting the main event slots as well. So I wanted to blame Nick for not trying to move on with the times and pushing some newer guys, some of the younger guys, but clearly he was doing that, but probably more because he had to do it. He didn't really have an option.
Right. I think that's exactly the case. And, the problem is if you don't beat an established star to get over, how do you get over? Right.
Right.
And so they didn't do a build with anybody to like, okay, let's have them beat Fargo. Let's have them beat Bobo Brazil or the Sheik or whoever they could get into the city to do a job for somebody, right? It's just you've got the same people just swimming around in the glass bowl here. But anyway, some of the interesting things that happened that year. So in 1978 in May, Gulas decides to go back to Louisville and compete with Jarrett in Louisville. And he started in May. He had a pretty loaded card. He had Fargo on it, the Sheik, Luthez, Ox Baker, the Fabulous Moolah. And then he came back just like 5 days later. Don Fargo against Dutch Mantel. He had Mantel against Savage during that time frame. Gulas and Eaton versus Tojo and Gypsy Joe. So the Jet Set. So Rocky Johnson was a surprising name to me. Rocky worked on and off for Gulas in 78, which I was really surprised by that. The Sheik came in several times. I'm not sure if I mentioned they were at the Commonwealth Convention Center, so they weren't at the Louisville Gardens.
Right.
So anyway, he tries to promote there for 4 or 5 months. That doesn't work, and he stops. But probably in response to that, Jarrett starts trying to promote Chattanooga from July to September.
Well,
so he's sending Lawler and LeDuc over there, and he's getting kind of a lot of the traditional East Tennessee guys. He's getting Bob Armstrong, Ronnie Garvin, Bob Roop, the Stomper, Boris Malenko, getting guys like that on the card. But that doesn't work out either. So they both try to, compete in each other's cities, and nothing really happens there of any note. On the Memphis side in 78, we talked about how hot 1977 was.
Yeah.
You had, the Dundee Lawler feud in the summer that was just sellout after sellout. And then you had the feud with Valiant. Joe LeDuc comes in 1978. They do good business, but they're not doing like sellout business. They're not doing 10,000 people. It's more like in the 7,000 people range.
Okay.
And this was also the time frame that Jarrett started to use Nick Bockwinkel instead of the NWA champion. And I think his feeling was, I only have to convince one person to do a title switch to get the AWA belt on Lawler versus trying to get the entire NWA to agree and put the belt on Lawler. And
well, it didn't work out so well.
Didn't work out so well. And the other part of it, Bockwinkel was so much better an opponent for Lawler than Harley Race was.
They had great matches, man. Every time they brought Nick back, I was just like, yes, another Bockwinkel match. All the footage is out there. They made sure to preserve a lot of that stuff, and it's really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, those guys had just fantastic chemistry and great matches, from 1978 through the mid 80s, so yeah. It was a smart move in terms of, I don't think the AWA had the prestige to everyone that the NWA had, but in terms of the matches, it was a much better match. And, Flair and Lawler style, when they worked later, it didn't work very well. They didn't gel.
Right.
One of the funny things that happened in the summer of 1978, Gulas sued Jarrett, stating that his promotion had paid Don Fargo, Ron Garfield, that's his working name, is a guy named Earl White, and Las Vegas Louie, who was a guy named Louie Heineman, $200 a night to no-show Gulas cards. The lawsuit was later withdrawn by Gulas. Wow. Now, I'm sure Nick wasn't paying anywhere near $200.
I was going to say, he probably could have paid him about $80 and they would have done that.
I don't know if it was a combined $200.
Yeah.
They were shelling out $600 a night to these guys to no-show a card.
Yeah, the Garfield brothers and Las Vegas Louie, man, my goodness.
Yeah.
I don't want you on my shows, but I'll give you $200 not to be on their shows.
Yeah.
Where they draw 900 people. That's really going to be a game changer there.
Yeah, pretty funny stuff. I did find, there's not a lot of footage out there, but I found something. I think it was on Tubi.
Yeah, you sent it to me.
Yeah, Mid-America Gulas Wrestling Volume 1. And most of it is from 1979, 1980. And it's full matches. It's studio stuff. It's arena footage. It's really interesting stuff during this time frame. So if you are interested in that era, I'll kind of go through the matches real quickly. But the fascinating thing to me was how hot the crowds were. Even if they weren't drawing huge amounts of people, the people there were really invested in it. And just, the heel pulling hair, people would go crazy. And, just the most simple heel tactics you can imagine are just getting these dramatic reactions that you would, never see, in modern wrestling.
I think the difference, in regards to that crowd reaction you're talking about, because you pointed that out to me before I watched the video footage. So, I obviously noticed it too, but I think some of that might've been, with the average fan maybe not attending Gulas anymore. This was the hardest core of hardcore fans left, the diehard fans of the territory. They were going to love their wrestling. They were really into it. Yeah, absolutely. Those that were still around.
Yeah. So there's a match of Disco Kid, a young Rip Rogers, who I would not have recognized because it was before he was bleached blonde. Mm-hmm. He had a little thicker physique, I think, at that time than he would later on when he kind of went to a bodybuilder type physique.
Right.
He is a baby face in a match against Tojo. Tojo looks as heavy as I think I've ever seen him. Clearly doesn't want to do anything in that match whatsoever. But
that part never changed.
Right. It's a very kind of funny match to watch, as it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? Terry Sawyer versus Bill Smithson. Bill Smithson's a guy that, I used to see kind of 83, 84, I think, do jobs on Memphis TV.
Yeah.
And he was later one of the Moondogs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he was getting kind of a push here in Nashville at that particular time. And this match looks like it was when Jarrett had taken over by that time. So some of these matches in 1980 are after Jarrett had taken over Nashville. There's a weird little studio Ginger the Wrestling Bear versus Terry Sawyer, Sawyer just kind of puts over that you don't want to wrestle a bear. And who would? Ripper Collins versus Pago Pago, who later became Coco Samoa. Ripper Collins had a really interesting body, and I'll leave it.
Sure.
He was not a physique guy, that's for sure. Billy Robinson versus Danny Davis, pretty good match, July 1980. That's when Billy Robinson was, quote, the CWA World Heavyweight Champion.
That's right.
Yeah, that belt never got over in any way, shape, or form, but they kept it for a few years. I think Jarrett had the idea, again, trying to get the world title on Lawler. I'm going to create my own world title, and then I'll work with the AWA, and we'll do a belt versus belt, and they'll agree to drop the strap to Lawler for a certain amount of time. And, of course, none of that ever happened.
Still never worked. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
They tried everything, though.
Great idea. Ken Lucas versus Larry Latham in a Chattanooga studio. The interesting thing to me, there was a very young Ronnie P. Gossett is doing the announcing.
Yeah.
So I really did not know who he was until he became a manager in Memphis. But I think he started as an announcer for Gulas when he was like 14 or 15 years old. He was really young. There's a Nashville arena match, Robert Gibson versus Bill Smithson. It's a pretty solid match. The Freebirds versus Don Fargo and Ron Garfield is definitely worth going out of your way to see. I mean, it's 1979 there when the Freebirds came in, and Michael Hayes is already fully Michael Hayes that we would know and love. It's not like, oh, here's a real young Michael Hayes, and he doesn't have the charisma, he doesn't have the hair, he doesn't have the look, he doesn't have the arrogance. I mean, he's already the full package at that time, and he's probably 19 years old.
Yeah, 19. Well, if it's depending on the time frame, 19, 20 years old. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, he's just fully formed, and Gordy is still young. He doesn't have quite the body shape you would see him later, but of course he was just this kind of huge kid and a great athlete. And Don Fargo's just kind of playing the wild man routine, and his partner Ron Garfield is just kind of there. But
Gordy was probably about 18 at that point, I think.
Yeah. I mean, just to see those guys that young, and I thought, oh, they're going to look green. It's not going to be very impressive. And I'm like, holy cow, these guys were ready. I mean, you could see why they were main eventing in the Superdome in a couple of years. It was just wild. Interesting. There's the only match that's not in that 78, 79, 80 time frame. You got the Fabulous Kangaroos, Al Costello and Don Kent, with Sir Clements, a manager who I'd heard of but never seen before, going against Jackie Fargo and Terry Latham. The announcer, Harry Thornton, just tries to squash any heat Clements could ever possibly get. It's just kind of the whole match is just kind of a cluster, but it was just it's interesting to see the Fabulous Kangaroos and Fargo during that era. There's a Terry Gordy Bobby Eaton match, which I think this particular one ends with Chris Colt interfering, and they were making Chris Colt the lead heel for a short amount of time. You got a match with Dutch Mantel and a heel Bobby Eaton managed by Tojo. Bobby wins, he blades, but he wins with interference. And then there's another Mantel versus Eaton match. But it's really worth going out of your way if you're interested in wrestling in this time frame. And again, it's called Mid-America Gulas Wrestling Volume 1. And Rip Rogers kind of introduces all the matches. There's some guy who kind of interviews Rip, but he gives a little background, and it's a lot of fun stuff on that. And it's not a couple hours, but well worth watching.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Rasslin podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Pro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of the Grenade Show, Regional Rasslin, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
All right, so as we go into 1979, there's a card early in the year. Savage's return from the Maritimes for a short period of time. He's on the card with the Mexican Angel, and the Freebirds are on the card as well. They draw 3,000, but then they bring Andre the Giant back in March in a 6-man tag, and the house is only 1,300.
Wow.
So
it's a head scratcher, man. It really is.
Yeah.
It's just bad advertising. I mean, I don't know here at 79 what it is.
Yeah. And in 79, although I I remember Jarrett being interviewed about this years later, and he didn't even remember it. But Fargo and Tojo started working some shots for Jarrett, and Lawler and Dundee started working a few shots for Gulas. And so Lawler and Dundee worked on a Gulas card with against the Blonde Bombers, and they draw 4,000 people.
Damn.
And then in November, they bring in Superstar Billy Graham and Lawler, and again they drew over 4,000 people. And otherwise, most of the cards are drawing about 1,000 again, the same as they were doing in 1978.
I thought Billy Graham was dead during that period. Isn't that what Gorilla Monsoon said? Okay.
Yeah, it was, post-death and pre-karate.
I got it,
So,
yeah. Oh, Kung Fu Grip, Billy Graham, one of the best.
So here's the guys who were headlining Nashville in 79. Bob Eaton 31 times. I mean, Bob Eaton's the guy, right? George Gulas 14 times. Almost all of those are tag teams with Bob Eaton, the Jet Set being on top.
Doubt.
Yeah, Dennis Condrey 14 times, Terry Gordy 11, Michael Hayes 10, Dutch Mantel 9, Chris Colt 8. And then you get to kind of the regulars, Tojo, Mexican Angel, Ken Lucas, those guys coming in and out. That may have been the year of the infamous Harley Race, George Gulas world title match, which I'm guessing Nick thought, well, I'm going out of business anyway, so I'll just give my son, because he's not even being pushed as a top heel or top babyface, but somehow he's the guy that gets the title shot.
Right. These 12 fans are coming no matter who's on top, so let's just, who cares, right, at this point?
Yeah, kind of a funny side note. So early 79, the Poffos leave, working for Nick Gulas. Savage works in Detroit for the Sheik for a little bit. Pretty short program up there.
I'm reading your notes right now.
and then so they decide to start ICW, and one of the first things they do is they sue the entire NWA for monopoly business practices. Mm-hmm. And this comes from the book. I think it's called Professional Wrestling in the Law.
That's it. Yeah.
It's a fantastic book. And why they would, sue the entire NWA is ridiculous.
They didn't just sue the NWA. They sued all the promoters children, the bookers, random fans. I mean, it was just anybody.
Eddie Graham's like, why in the world do I have anything with a promotion in Georgetown, Kentucky? But anyway, Nick Gulas in the court document said, the Poffos left his company after Randy Savage threatened to kill George Gulas.
Would have loved to have been in the locker room that night.
And nothing sounds more legitimate to me than Randy Savage threatening to kill. I mean, can you imagine
100%.
Two more diametrically opposed personalities? And Savage at that time had been in the business for years. And he had to fight and claw for every little thing that he got. And you got this clueless promoter's son, who has no athletic ability.
Daddy said sell. Was that right?
Yeah. So also, like I said, Fargo showed up a few times in Memphis that year. That has the infamous Jerry Lawler, Jackie Fargo versus quote unquote Mil Mascaras, an Austin Idol main event where Mil does the stretcher job. So, Mil, as in the Mexican Angel, Francisco Flores.
Not the actual Mil Mascaras, who was not known to do very many stretcher jobs. In fact, probably zero. I'm going to go with it.
One of the surprising things to me, and this just tells you that Nick knew things were going badly, was he sold the city of Birmingham in 1979 to a group called McKinsey Wrestling Enterprises, and it was Curtis McKinsey and Tony Ledoux, L-A-D-U, Ledoux. And so in the summer of that year, you get this guy, Tony Ledoux, who I know nothing about, but he's working main events. Like he and Mike Jackson are going against the Assassins. Now, these are not Jody Hamilton and Tom Ernesto.
Right.
These are Assassins. Jimmy Jones and Melvin Kimball are the Assassins. So basically, Birmingham, which in 1977 had this incredibly hot summer, and they're drawing these really big crowds, it becomes this just little outlaw indie town.
Yeah.
And it went dark by November of that year. So he's lost probably his most profitable city at that time. And really, until Ron Fuller started promoting Birmingham in 1981, nobody was really doing anything there. Lots of interesting movements in the world of wrestling at that time. On the Memphis side, in 1979, Robert Fuller comes in to book Memphis, and it's really not working out. Nobody really cares who wins the van in the main event in Memphis in 1979. But he's brought in, a lot of the Knoxville crew in there. You got Dick Slater, Toru Tanaka, Mr. Fuji, Mongolian Stomper, Tony Charles. Well, then, as you know, you have the infamous split on the east side where Bob Roop and Garvin and all those people leave Ron Fuller. And so one day, they have a really poor show in Memphis during the summer, and you've got all that chaos on the other end, and Robert's gone and half the crew is gone. So really, Jarrett had to just kind of rebuild from scratch at that time. He brought in the Larry Latham and Wayne Ferris as the Blonde Bombers. They did the Tupelo Concession Brawl. Austin Idol was brought in later that year. But I think what that shows you is that because Jarrett didn't have to rely on somebody being the booker, that he could do it himself, he could rebound from a really bad situation like that.
Right.
Whereas not everybody else could do that. Mantel had worked pretty much all of 1978 for Gulas. He went to Puerto Rico for the first time in 79, and they came back at the end of the year. At the end of the year, he's gone. So Savage is gone. Mantel's gone. And you just really don't have any great people to headline. They did a show in Nashville with Fargo and the Blonde Bombers early in 1980 that drew over 3,000 people. But then there's no crowd attendance figures after that. Bob Eaton and George Gulas are still on top, but then you've still got Tojo, Gypsy Joe, Fargo's in and out. You're just recycling the same guys. And Tim Dill said one of the problems was you just had to keep, turn and babyface heels among these same guys all the time. And if you turn somebody too quickly or too often, it loses its steam. So Bob Eaton would be the top babyface, then be the top heel, and okay, our top heel's gone, so Bob Eaton's our top heel now. And it got to the point where it's not effective anymore.
Yeah, I see Rocky Brewer had a few. Hello. Tell me something about Shawnee Bo Win. Now, what the hell is that?
It's a great name, isn't it? I can't tell you anything about Shawnee Bo Win. But yeah, I mean, and these are guys that are in the main event. Right. Kurt Von Heck, Luke Graham's back for one, Randy Collins, Roger Mason, Jerry Barber. Here's the last card with Gulas talent, and it's June 18th in Nashville. I'll read the entire card. The main event is just so cringe. So you got the Bounty Hunter defeated the Beast. I have no idea who those people are. Gypsy Joe, 3 years of being in the territory now. He goes over Ray Candy by DQ. Jackie Fargo and Randy Fargo defeat the Manchurians, Tiu and Tapu, who had been in almost the entire year of 1977. So there's recycling guys. Here's the main event. Bobby Eaton, Tojo Yamamoto, and the Great Togo defeat the babyface team of Jerry Barber, George Gulas, and Rocky Brewer.
Wow.
I mean, that's your babyface team right there.
Jerry Barber headlining here with George Gulas, of course, and Rocky Brewer. Wow, yeah, that's the final card, huh?
The funny thing is, it will still say it's Gulas for a couple of months, but it's clearly not. And I think it's the old thing where the same thing happened in 1977, where they just didn't update the format of the poster. Right. So even though Jarrett's really promoting, it doesn't show. So July 30th in Nashville, here's the first Jarrett card in there. Starts with two women's matches, which is interesting. Clary Cunningham versus Debbie Beal. Brenda Bateman versus Renee Gordon. Your world heavyweight title match is the third match on the card. That's a valuable world title.
Yeah. People
from all over the world did. Billy Robinson versus Danny Davis, who Davis was primarily a manager at that time with the Blonde Bombers. Ted Allen versus Vinny Romero. Robert Gibson versus Bill Smithson, and I think that's one of the matches that's on the program we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Video. Dick Steinborn versus Roger Howell. Dutch Mantel versus Bob Eaton, which, that's a smart to bring Dutch back to Nashville because he has some history there. And on top, you have Jerry Jarrett and Tojo versus the Blonde Bombers, Larry Latham and Wayne Ferris. And I guess at that time, they didn't have their studio TV show set up yet, or they hadn't. They kept referring to it as the world's largest TV taping venue or something, as the Nashville Fairgrounds. So they were still trying to get everything squared away. But in the next few months, you'd see Valiant, Robert Gibson, Dundee, all the Jarrett guys come out. George Gulas is never seen again from that point forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, you see pretty quickly here, Jarrett gets rid of, basically cuts all the fat, which is almost essentially 99% of that roster. Keeps Bob Eaton, which is a wise move, but life goes on.
Yeah, I kept Bob Eaton and Tojo, and that's about it. So, and of course, he had that long personal relationship with Tojo.
Right.
So some more fun stuff that happens. So after basically Jarrett purchases the town from Gulas, however that arrangement was made, Gulas runs to the TV station and says, "Okay, I don't have any, television show anymore. Cancel the wrestling show."
Wow.
So Jarrett had to go out and get his own programming time. So it went from a CBS to an ABC affiliate there in Nashville. Jarrett sued Gulas, stating Gulas was purposely undermining Jarrett regarding TV contracts and talent. Gulas countersued for conspiracy charges, and the cases were settled before trial. So still some bad blood between the two. The other thing that's, interesting for 1980 and Jarrett taking over Nashville is that's the year he didn't have Lawler. That's the year Lawler leg was broken by Jerry Calhoun very early in the year, and Memphis, really struggled that year. Most of the houses being, 4,000, 5,000. It would occasionally bump up, but by the end of the year, it was pretty dire. And then Lawler made his comeback at the end of the year, sells out, and then they just start doing great business with Jimmy Hart being his foil. So it wasn't like Jarrett was picking this up when he was on an upswing in business. His business was really bad. But, also he'd been promoting in Jonesboro, Arkansas every Saturday night for years. So I'm sure that he could make a lot more money in Nashville than he could Jonesboro, Arkansas.
Yeah.
So Jarrett tried to go to Chattanooga again in 1980. That didn't work. So whatever they were doing in Memphis, Chattanooga just wasn't buying. And then by 1981, that becomes a Georgia Championship Wrestling town. And then we haven't talked about Buddy Fuller much. So Buddy Fuller was brought in by Jerry when he split from Nick, basically just for pure political reasons. And he gave him a very minimal amount of points on the promotion.
Yeah.
And in 1980, there's this kind of, with the Sheik kind of going out of business, people start saying, okay, who can promote some of these towns? And Buddy Fuller and I think it was Louis Tilley. I'm not sure if I said that name correctly, but they want to go into Ohio. So here's what Jarrett talks about. Buddy was never involved in the promotion of the Tennessee territory. For a time, Buddy owned a farm in western Tennessee, and during that time, he opened a wrestling school. I brought Buddy into the business as a political move, and because his father was in great part responsible for me getting started in the business. Buddy asked if I could secure television in Ohio because he wanted to get active in the business. I got television in Cincinnati, Dayton, and a couple of small markets in Ohio. I put the Memphis TV on the towns and booked the first couple of tours with this talent. Buddy and Louis Tilley moved to Ohio. The plan was for them to begin with some of our Tennessee talent and develop a crew and begin producing their own television shows. The split was 50-50 in Ohio between Buddy and I. On the first night of the first tour, Bill Dundee called me and alerted me that things were, quote, beginning to smell funny. Dundee said Fuller had come to the dressing room and told the talent that he had found a back door to the building open and hundreds of fans were coming in the door. Bill said the place was very near a sellout. Various stories came in during the remainder of the tour, much like the first night, but with a different twist. One spin was that the talent was told that most of the crowd was paper because they wanted to have a big crowd on the first night. There's an old saying that goes, if it walks like a duck and quacks, it's probably a duck. Well, this tour was walking like a duck and quacking loudly. I called all the buildings because I had set the buildings up in the first place and asked that copies of box office reports be sent to me. When Buddy showed up in Hendersonville with a check and reports that failed to match the reports from the building, he realized his hand had been called. I advised him that he and Louis could have Ohio, and I'd run the Tennessee area. I had already drawn a contract in anticipation of his report. He signed the contract, and that was the end of our partnership. Years later, Buddy called and asked if the IRS had contacted me. I said no. Buddy advised that they would be calling me and that he had told them that he had no assets, and asked if I would do the same. I said no. I explained that while I had few fears, the one I did have was messing with the IRS. I told them that unless he forgave the remainder of his contract, I'd have to report it. Buddy was then faced with caught lying to the IRS or forgiving the balance of the contract. Buddy forgave the contract. After Buddy's death, his wife and Ron Fuller, Buddy's son, found the contract and got an attorney and sued for the balance. With Buddy dead and all the issues involving the IRS and the fact that Buddy had left small children with little means of support, my attorneys advised that winning the lawsuit could be as costly as the settlement. I settled with Buddy's widow.
Wow.
So, interesting story about Buddy Fuller. We've heard some interesting story about Buddy Fuller's business.
I've heard lots of stories about Buddy Fuller. Indeed.
Nothing that Jerry Jarrett said there is really much different than what any of the other stories that Buddy Fuller was. Involved.
You go back and you look at that Welch family, man. You hear the stories of being held up at gunpoint many a time on the way out of the to go to the bank and things of that nature. And
yeah, well, that reminds me of another story that talking about Bobby Eaton being kind of the top heel and top babyface in the last few years of the Gulas territory. Mm-hmm. Rip Rogers said that at one point that Bobby had a start date with Georgia, and the day that he's supposed to drive down to Georgia, he goes out and somebody's vandalized his car and he can't go anywhere.
Wow.
So most likely an inside job. Somebody made sure that Bobby.
Well,
wasn't
Bobby, I guess you're just going to have to stick around here for another couple weeks.
Yeah. What can we do? And I thought it was kind of interesting. There's this kind of theory that before national expansion, you just opened a wrestling promotion and the money just flowed in, and it just did it as long as you wanted to do it. But if you looked at, this 1979, 1980 time frame, you got Mike LaBelle going out of business in Los Angeles, I think in 81, Roy Shire in San Francisco going out of business, Leroy McGurk in Oklahoma, Ed Farhat in Detroit, Indianapolis was really no longer, a significant territory.
Right.
So for all these different reasons, all these places went out of business. And I think that could have happened very easily in Memphis, but the two reasons it didn't was because Jerry Jarrett was so smart, in understanding the wrestling business and understanding booking, and because Jerry Lawler was such a fantastic talent. And if you would have had an owner who didn't understand booking, or somebody who wasn't invested in the promotion like Lawler was, I think that could have easily gone down as well. So there was no guarantees even before national expansion that your wrestling territory was just going to be successful forever. And I've seen some of the end of the Leroy McGurk territory, and you've got Jimmy Snuka wrestling in there in the studio.
Yeah.
And there's just no reaction whatsoever. And it's just when something's dying, it's just so hard to turn around. The guy that would be, one of the biggest stars of the decade of the 1980s.
No, I mean, just think about that. He leaves there and goes off to the WWF, and look, he's main eventing over there as a heel, then a babyface. Yeah. I mean, he goes on to basically he's Hulk Hogan before Hulk Hogan. There, that little brief period where they're trying to find that next big thing beyond Bob Backlund, and Jimmy Snuka's that guy. I'm not saying he was going to be the world champion, but they certainly had him up there main eventing during that time period. And of course his feud with Roddy Piper and things before he went completely cuckoo. But I mean,
yeah.
But you talk about that Tri-States when George Scott was booking Tri-States there for a little bit when they were trying to give it a jump start. It just didn't work. There was just nothing left.
Yeah. It's just, I think that once a wrestling territory starts going down, it's just very hard to reverse it. I think that's, what happened to Nick. I think he wasn't a booker. He didn't have that one guy he could build his territory around. The talent got very stale. He was using the same guys in and out all the time. And there just wasn't the creativity, the freshness, the ability to get guys over. And fans just, even though they didn't have a different product, they just said, this isn't worth my time and energy anymore.
Right.
So, yeah. So that kind of puts a bow on it, I think. My thesis is I cannot blame George Gulas for killing the Nashville Terror. I think people will always want a simple answer for things, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, that territory died because of X.
Well, it didn't help it either, but no, it didn't kill it outright, right?
Right. The AWA didn't die because a promoter's son was pushed too hard, or it's just there were a lot of other factors involved there, and I'm not saying that those are similarities in skill sets. Nepotism in the wrestling business was hardly a new thing, and would continue to certainly be very prevalent.
You can look at the McMahons, but when Dusty's booking, here comes Dustin. When Bill Watts takes the book, here comes Eric Watts. Yeah, you're going to see that. Yeah, absolutely.
And then you've got the generation where Jerry Jarrett and Lawler's son and Bill Dundee's son are working the main events in Memphis, and a very diminished Memphis territory, but not sure some of those guys would have gotten a big push anywhere else in the world.
Just the lack of size alone, certainly.
Right.
With Jamie Dundee or even Brian Christopher, who was much more talented, I think, but at the same time, just kind of short in stature. But I'm glad they were given the opportunity. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, you're right. When you think about, well, who were their fathers? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's like, Randy Savage asking Rip Rogers, why I have the belt? And the Rip said, because you're the best. And he said, no, because my dad owns the company.
I love Randy Savage, man.
It's not that complicated. But anyway, this has been a super fun project for me. I'm really glad we got to do this. I know we have another project in mind. I don't think we want to let that cat out of the bag yet, but I'm very excited about doing some hardcore research on our next project and getting into that one. Yeah. And certainly we'll be talking about some of the same people we've talked about during the end of the Nashville era. So that's a little hint as to what we'll be doing in the future.
Names will reappear, that's for sure.
Yeah. A lot of fun stories will be told.
Well, that's, like I said, it's hard to let things go, man. But, wow, it was a hell of a story going through 77 and kind of looking at the reasons why Jarrett split away. And some of them sound very sound and reasonable, with the business issues and things of that nature. And Jarrett never necessarily got along with Gulas. It was more about the Welch side of things. And Memphis took off, man. It was just like a rocket ship straight to the top, really. I mean, and he got a lot of luck thrown in between his good business sense. I mean, just Jimmy Valiant at the end of the year, Dundee getting over, who would have thought that would have got over to the level that it got over? It was drawing more than Lawler and Dusty. I mean, it was a fun ride through 77 Memphis, not so much on the Nashville side for poor Nick Gulas and company, but that was fun to run through because I'd never done that before, seeing what really the beginning of the demise anyway of the Nashville side of things and kind of just looking over what happened afterwards. I can kind of see why it never revived even for a brief period, really. It's unfortunate, but it's part of wrestling history, and Memphis would go on to have many more fun years of excitement and stories to tell. And we're doing that right now on the 85 project. And, I'm working on maybe doing an 86 project on my Patreon. So we're definitely got a lot of, irons in the fire when it comes to the Memphis territory. But yeah, we've got some other exciting things we're working on right now. And I can't wait to see your side of the research. I'm doing what I can on my end, pulling things out of the old message boards and things of that nature. We'll be announcing it on social media fairly soon. So stay tuned for that, guys. I can't wait to get there. But Man, Steve, I got to thank you so much for doing this with me. I couldn't have done it with anybody else. I mean, your energy you put into this, your enjoyment, the excitement, the electricity was so thick you could literally cut it with a knife, to quote Gorilla.
Yeah, well, it was fun to relive that, because that's 1977 in Memphis was really the first time I started, being a fan and really paying attention to the product. And then I think Jerry Jarrett was probably more motivated that year than he ever was the rest of his life,
Sure.
Because it was his business now. He had to sink or swim now. And, he did everything right that year. It was just, like you say, the way he built Dundee into the star was so smart the way he did it. Valiant's supposed to be in there for one night. He says, this guy's a main event guy. Immediately changes his booking plans. It was a pretty magical time to be watching the product during that era.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of the pieces fell, right where he needed them to, but then again, he needed to pick them up and put them in place, and that's what he did. And I might have said there's a little too many stipulations going on in the Lawler-Dundee feud, but apparently the fans thought otherwise of 1977, so who am I to judge?
Yeah.
But it's fun to see the early inception of Paul Orndorff and what he would become, and Junkyard Dog coming through the territory, Dusty and Lawler. I mean, you don't get that every day. That's one of those fantasy things that a lot of people probably don't even realize it happened. What if, and there it was right in front of us, Lawler reading a script of jokes that he had set up for the American Green Bay Biz. So
yeah, that's one of my favorite Lawler interviews. It's so funny.
I'm glad it exists.
Such good. Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. We're gonna get on the off ramp for a while, and then we're gonna meet up on the highway again.
We will reconvene. Until then, I want to thank you so much, Steve, for doing this with me.
All right, thank you.